It's an antidote to a problem that everybody experiences in the world right now, where people feel busy but not necessarily productive, where they feel stretched too thin at work or at home, where they feel that sense of their time, their day, even their mind being hijacked by other people's agenda for them. This is the way of the non-essentialist, and the antidote is the way of the essentialist. That is, instead of the undisciplined pursuit of more, the disciplined pursuit of less, particularly less but better. So essentialism is made up of three parts. You explore what's essential, you create space to eliminate what is non-essential, and then you make it as effortless as possible to do what matters most.
Welcome to the Mindset Game Podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to Greg McKeown. Greg has written two amazing New York Times bestsellers. One is called Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less, which has been voted by Goodreads as the #1 leadership and success book to read in a lifetime. And I agree, it's an amazing book. And the second one is Effortless, Make It Easier to Do What Matters Most. And together they've been published in 37 languages. Greg is one of the most sought-after public speakers globally, and he's spoken to over 500 companies while traveling to over 40 countries. His clients include Apple, Google, Microsoft, Nike, and so on. He also hosts an amazing podcast called the Greg McKeown Podcast. Highly recommended. It's ranked in the top 5 of all self-improvement podcasts out of 11,000 and ranked top 10 in educational podcasts out of 30,000 on Apple Podcasts. That is an amazing achievement. His work has been covered in print media, including the New Yorker, New York Times, Fast Company, Time, Fortune, Harvard Business Review, and so on. Also been featured in NPR, NBC, Fox, multiple times on the Steve Harvey Show. And by the way, I invite you guys to go to YouTube and check that out. It's really fun to see. I've followed Greg's work for some time now. I receive his weekly 1-minute Wednesday newsletter. It is amazing, chock full of really short, simple strategies to help me live an essential life. And that's what we're going to focus on in this conversation, really about how to find what he calls the way of the essentialist. So Greg, it is such an honor to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So let's dive right in. Like, what is essentialism? What is this way of the essentialist?
It's an antidote to a problem that everybody experiences in the world right now, where people feel busy but not necessarily productive, where they feel stretched too thin at work or at home, where they feel that sense of their time, their day, even their mind being hijacked by other people's agenda for them. This is the way of the non-essentialist. And the antidote is the way of the essentialist. That is, instead of the undisciplined pursuit of more, the disciplined pursuit of less, particularly less but better. So essentialism is made up of three parts. You explore what's essential, you create space to eliminate what is non-essential, and then you make it as effortless as possible to do what matters most. And that's an ongoing process. That's essentialism. And that's why it came into the world.
And so much needed in the world right now with so much noise and chaos. So let's dive right in even more to some of these strategies that you offer. Like, I imagine most of the people listening are in that boat of the non-essentialist. So tell us, how do we convert? How do we really do less but better to make a higher contribution?
Well, one thing that people can do is to take control of maybe not their whole life at first, but 30 minutes. And even that seems like quite a lot in some ways when you compare it to the normal, day-to-day habit of our lives. But that experience when you wake up in the morning and you just have just a couple of seconds of peace before all of the noise hits you. And of course, if you have young children, you've got all of that as well. And so your day is immediately off, and it's easy for it to feel reactive and frenetic and frantic all the way through it. And so if you can carve out half an hour, and I don't do it every day, but when I do it, I've come to think of it as like a power half an hour to do a very specific process. It makes all the difference for me, and I can feel a shift in the experience of the day, as well as the achievement in it too. And so here's the process. 3 broad steps. You are asking the question, what? That is, what is happening in my life? So what? That is, why does it matter? What's significant in all of this other data? And then, now what? What am I going to do about it today? So the first few minutes and the optimal amount of time, if we wanted to turn this into a protocol, is 6 minutes. For the first part, for 6 minutes, you can set a timer, and it's just a download with no rules. You're just writing out anything, all that noise in your head. It can be the tasks that you want to get done. It can be updates from yesterday, things that went well or things that went badly. It's just whatever noise is inside of the rather poor office of your mind. And you create some space, and then you get to look at it. And then step 2 is, well, what does this mean? What's happening? And why does it matter? What's important in this information? You're trying to synthesize. You're trying to hear the signal in the sound. And then when you get to step 3, now what? There's a specific methodology for this. It's the 1, 2, 3 method. And what you're trying to identify is one thing that's essential. So that is, out of all of this noise and then your own thinking through it, you're identifying the priority for today. In an ideal scenario, it's not always possible, but you're trying to then schedule 2 or 3 hours of your day on that. And in some ways, that's the most important part or achievement in this half an hour, because once you have that, you've identified something in almost all cases where you would otherwise not even do it at all. It's important, but no one's asking for it. So that's the 1. And then the 2 is 2 things that are essential but urgent. So those are things you might get to because there's burden on you. And then the 3 things is maintenance items. I mean, that literally can be the laundry. It can be paying bills. It's really anything that if you don't do it, tomorrow's going to be a lot harder, or 2 weeks from now is going to be a lot harder. So that's the 1, 2, 3 method. All of that can fit, I think, very realistically in 30 minutes. You can do it even faster if you need to. And as I say, I don't do it every day, but I do it often. And what a difference it makes, a discernible difference. That to me is one very tangible way to start shifting from being a non-essentialist, probably by default, to an aspiring essentialist.
And what if something maybe doesn't matter as much to you? It's not as important to you, but it's really important to the people in your life, maybe to your partner, maybe to your team at work. How do you handle it in that case? Meaning it's not so essential to you, but essential to others.
Yeah. Well, this is the number 1 question I've had since writing Essentialism. Well, maybe there's sort of 2 questions. One is, okay, where do I start? What's my, how do I turn this mindset of less but better into practical steps? And I've shared one of those ways. And I should say, even though I hope it's not in any way salesy, but I just happened to find out about it just yesterday, that the Essentialism planner that I have literally spent certainly more than the last 10 years, but like I was under contract 10 years ago to create it and pulled out of the contract because I didn't feel like I had a good enough solution. And it just felt like every other planner that I'd ever used, and it just wasn't yet unique enough. But we finally did it, and it's available now. But it's available for pre-order now.
That's awesome. Congrats.
It actually comes out 31st of December of this year, just in time, for New Year, New You. It's a 90-day tool for the process that we just described. Anyway.
I love that, because I think we oftentimes in these podcast conversations touch on kind of key insights, maybe some strategies, and people often need more support. They need more opportunity for self-reflection, more guidance, a process. So I think doing that's incredible.
Yes. And the more overwhelmed we are, the harder it is to think, because we're in red brain all the time. we're so overwhelmed by decision fatigue, and this has been going on for so long, it's so normalized now that if you provide a solution to somebody that isn't real, in a sense, isn't effortless, that if it makes you think too hard to implement it, it just won't happen. You just will pull away from it and do something else. And so I really have a high aspiration that it will be really useful to people, that it will be something that they'll come to, that they'll use easily, that will help them cut through the clutter and will become a really important ritual. For example, just one other practical thing, and I think this is a step towards your question of how do you deal with other people's sense of what's essential, and the differences in what everybody thinks the priority should be. Is that the beginning part of this planner and the beginning part of the practice is you can have a personal quarterly offsite in which you're stepping out of that reactive, in the moment to moment way of living. And it's not so high level that it's, what would you say, just disconnected to the challenges of the day. But every 90 days, we know that executives do it, well, at least in theory that they do it, with their teams. And we know that that's useful in making sure that they don't get misaligned or get, just wasting their time and energies on the wrong investments. Well, that's true in our lives too, where we have such limited time, attention, resources. And so, every 90 days, you can ask these 3 questions that try to give you an overall direction. And it's this, and it fits with essentialism. You say, okay, explore. What is something that is essential that I'm underinvesting in? But eliminate, the second step in essentialism. You say, okay, well, what are things that are non-essential that I'm over-investing in? And then the third question is, well, once I've identified those things, how can I make it as effortless as possible to be able to make those trade-offs over this 90-day period? And I've simplified that to sort of 3 main questions, but in the quarterly offsite, there's 12 questions. And once you've completed that, what you think you have is a plan, and you do, but what you also have is a script for a conversation with someone else, with your partner, with the person that you're in business with your team. I mean, whoever is influenced by by these decisions you're trying to make, you can now go to them and use it as a launching off point. Well, this is what I think is important that I'm not investing in. This is what I think is non-essential that I'm spending too much time on. Let's talk about how we might be able to make the shift. So it's at least an introduction into the conversation we need to have to be able to start negotiating our way through, all of these competing priorities for our time.
And I think, regarding competing priorities, I mean, it's so aligned with values, right? As you even said, like, why does it matter? So what, right? Like, if we know our values, like what's most important, then it is easier to discern what's essential and non-essential, at least at this time, right? To create a plan. So what about when there are conflicting values, right? How do you discern like which has a higher priority?
It sounds like quite a simple question, or at least it's easy to understand the question. It's really, of course, very complex because things can matter in different ways, not only to different people, but over different time horizons. And so, but I think the test that I think is most useful is the longevity test. So you say, okay, well, I mean, what matters? What matters on my deathbed? Like that test. And of course, I'm not the first to suggest that test, but it's a great essentialist test. My best friend of 35 years is dying of cancer right now. Like it's unthinkable, unimaginable. but there's really nothing like death or how would you say, end in mind thinking for cutting through not just the noise of our lives, but the lies of our lives, which I don't think are the same thing, where we will, like self-deception is really universal human challenge, and it's really easy to see why we all want it and choose it, because it's easier to just avoid inconvenient truths because they do not have to change. You can just keep going, making the choices that we're making. And so I think this idea of what's going to matter, I mean, I've said end of life, and I just interviewed on my podcast, his name's Eric Newton. I think I'm saying that name right. And his wife just died of cancer, and he wrote the most beautiful post about it. I didn't know him at all, but somebody else tagged me in it. And I thought it was really, really insightful and powerful. And so I wanted to interview him. And he had so many essentialist statements in this post. But he said if there's a purpose to it all, it's the ever deepening connection with the people who matter most. He says, at the end of life, I promise you, that's the only thing that's going to matter. And that's what he watched with his wife, is that in the last 6 weeks of her life, she went from already being connected to people, but suddenly realizing a regret of, oh, I haven't been as open and vulnerable, truly, deeply open and vulnerable as I ought to have been with the people that mattered most. And so she just suddenly was able to love in a completely different way, in a very touching way to me. And I didn't even know her, but touching, of course, in a different way to the people that did. And so I think this test, and I'll maybe just offer one more extension to this test, which is the intergenerational test. So end of life thinking is so much more clarifying than, okay, what do I need to do? You know, what do I need to do this minute? You know, what's acting upon me in this moment? Or so it's a great test compared to reacting, but it's also very limited test still. So it's way better, but birth till death thinking is really oneself wide, oneself deep. And I mean, I spent, most of my life teaching that idea to people that end of death, that's a really useful test. And I still think so. But what really matters is something like 100-year thinking. Mm-hmm. And if you go 100 years forward from today, I did it once on a plane, as playing with these ideas and thinking about them for my own life. And I pulled up literally an Excel spreadsheet, and I put my age on that day, and I went forward 100 years. And of course, I'm not going to live 100 years. And so I approximate my death date, and I take each of my children, same thing, how old they are today, go forward. And what was so striking to me, and even now, it creates a kind of perspective. What's that word where you're if you have a fear of heights or a vertigo? It's like a perspective vertigo, which doesn't sound like a great sales pitch on why people should do 100-year thinking, but the vertigo is caused by this. When you do this, you find that, well, 100 years from now, well, your children, of course, are all gone too. And probably your grandchildren. They're certainly going to be elderly. And your great-grandchildren are also quite old by then. And you go, okay, so then you can build even further on this practice, because you can say this also vertigo-inducing idea, which is, I've done this sometimes in groups of maybe 500 executives, or I'll say, okay, so who here by show of hands can name their great grandparents? And you might be got five, maybe at the very most 5% of people, maybe at five hands of a group of that size. And I never test them on it. So that's just who claims they know. And so what you have is this real oddity of we hardly know anything. If you don't know the name of your great grandparents, you don't know anything else. I mean, that's the first thing you'd know if you knew anything. And so if you don't even know that, then it's amazing. The fallout of like the loss of knowledge and memory is striking and shocking to me. However, there's something very ennobling about the insight too, because those people define for most of us where we live. They define, well, first of all, they define that we live at all, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't even be here. So like we owe a lot more than the list I'm about to make, but it's also true that where we live will have been influenced by them, even defined by them. The language we speak is often directly because of them. The culture, the unspoken things, the influence is so massive, it's just forgotten. And the same is true for this 100-year test into the future. In 100 years, my great-grandchildren will barely know my name. Let's assume that they're the same as everybody else. But the influence can be absolutely massive. And so if I could summarize all of this into a single rule, it's not my words, I'm just utilizing it somebody else's, that what matters most lasts longest. That to me is a test in distinguishing between the vital few and the important many.
And that mindset is very much about, a wider perspective as well, like humanity. Right? Not just how will it benefit our great grandchildren? How will it benefit future generations beyond that and their, the planet? And so I think that that's a really interesting distinction about that around what matters most lasts the longest. And I remember having a conversation with somebody who started a very well-known therapeutic methodology, who has 3 children. And he said, that this baby of his, which is now a very well-known methodology, was essentially his 4th child. And that when his children were young, he wasn't able to give them as much because he focused on that baby, which is now helping millions of people around the world. So again, it's that distinction. And I ask truly also for myself, as I sit here with you, if what matters most in the, is, let's say, family, right? And I believe that's true. My daughters, my husband, and people I care about, right? Those are the ones that will be around my deathbed, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And if for many of the people listening, there is a higher mission. I believe for everybody listening,
Sure.
There is a higher mission. And so how do you, again, differentiate, whether to focus on that, or clearly it's an and how do you manage that, the day-to-day decisions? How do I spend my time and energy?
Well, I tried to be careful when I wrote Essentialism, and in the things I'm writing even now, I'm trying to be careful in not overstepping bounds, of what somebody else thinks is essential, because that can change over time for people. Well, it does change over time for people, and also the wiser we get, it changes. So it changes because of life circumstance and life, the age that we are in life, and just the opportunities that we have. Like a lot of things change it, but then also our own perspective changes. And I think that we still need to search for what's the highest priority. What is the highest priority I can serve at a given time from a sort of scriptural or biblical point of view, and in whether people have read it or not, they could read it through a psychological lens too. The idea of seek first the kingdom of God and all these things will be added unto you is true in this way as well, where you say, what's the highest, noblest good I can possibly sacrifice for and serve? And once you get that once that is defined, once you put that first, everything else shifts into its proper perspective or falls out of your life altogether. And so I think that it's this idea of a life essential intent that's one decision that makes 1,000 decisions. So once you have that aligned, many other things will find their correct place. But beyond that, I think there are some other things we need to do beyond that, which is there are certain things in our life that act on us, and they're very, very rarely the most important relationships and pursuits. So there's this combination of having to put a bound on the things that act on us, the things that we'll get notice for. If I write an article that's well written and a lot of people like it, I'm going to get feedback immediately. If I post something in social media and lots of people like it, you get an immediate boost from that. But if I go and spend time swimming with my children, nobody's making a fuss about that out there. There's no praise in that. There's no, let's say, obvious things, right? There's no money in that. There's those kinds of there's important incentive imbalances in our modern society. I don't know that they have to be there. They just are currently. And so we have to act upon the system that we've inherited and make it not so invisible. So, for example, let's get a little more practical. I think having an end of the day list, that's really what the 1, 2, 3 method and the power half an hour is about, is that here's what's important. These are the things that need to be done. And when it's done, I'm done. I'm not going to carry on. Having an end of the day time. These are actually ideas I didn't write about at all in Essentialism, but did in Effortless. And I remember in the middle of the pandemic, that's when I started instituting the end of the day list and end of the day time, especially because if I didn't, I would get pulled into what I think many people remember, the Zoom, eat, sleep, repeat life. And there's no end. There's no natural end. 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7, 10, 11, 12. It's all the same. And so people are there and they're 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, just scanning through Zillow, and they're not even interested in buying a house, but somehow they're just doing something, and then that cycle continues. And so I was like a town crier at, it was 5 o'clock was the chosen time, and I would go out, and whatever the time was, I had to yell it out. That was my accountability moment. It was 5 o'clock, or 5:03, or on a bad day 5:20. You don't want to do that as loud, but just gives you an excuse to be done. And so I think you have to create boundaries to those things that act on you, so that there's space for the other things. I think that's one really important way to do this. Another is to build routines around what matters most, and then trust those routines. Don't mess with them for every possible exception. Get up at the same time, early if you can. We've just recently implemented that, newly in our own family. And my goodness, what a difference it's made to be up early and to be exercising as a whole family, as it happens, early. And then, taking one of our daughters has a 0 hour at school. So she's there early. And so everything is moved early. It's so refreshing to just have it. It means that what happens with that is then that 5 o'clock comes, that time comes, it's 5:30 now for me. It comes and you feel satisfied. You've done important work today. You did your done for the day list, or a lot of it. And it feels like, yeah, I'm tired enough now, and I don't want to keep going to the early hours. And so this idea of routine is another way. It's like the genius of routine. and to celebrate routine that you've chosen. Anyway, those are a couple of ideas I think that really matter.
And I think they're great ideas. I think that, as you said, there's also the mindsets underneath all of this, because sometimes when people feel that they are not enough, they're not contributing enough, they're not doing enough, that's when this whole problem arises, essentially, right? They say yes to things just to simply say yes to them, that even though it may not be 100% congruent. And there's oftentimes that, I believe, that mindset underneath that's driving it. Like, I need to do more, I need to contribute more, I need to help more people, I need to. So we,
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts as we complete here? What are your thoughts around kind of the belief systems that are necessary for us to truly live an essential life?
I think we have to discover that we already have axiomatic assumptions that are wrong. That is dominant assumptions that are unseen, that are sort of the foundation of the non-essentialist world that we are currently in. Among them is if you do it all, you can have it all. That is so false. It's almost, I don't know, it's almost pathological. It's like, what do we even mean? You just do it all. Do all of what? Everything? We're just going to do everything? All the opportunities that are at our fingertips. We're going to learn. We're just going to get to the end of the internet. We're going to read all of the articles that are available. We're going to learn everything that ChatGPT knows. We're going to, it's just ridiculous. We're going to reach every person on the planet. We're going to, this is such a nonsense. And then even if absurdly we could do it all, would we have it all? Is that what that means? If you literally, let's say we double down on non-essentialism and we say, okay, we're not going to sleep at all. We're going to do every possible thing that comes our way so that we can't miss out on anything. Let's say we did it, which is crazy, but let's say it. Would that equal what we really want? Would our partner, our spouse, our children actually love that? Would we have the intimacy that we want, the deep connection? Would we have a satisfying life? Would that be the stuff of regrets, pretty quickly? So I think we have to see that, it's like the only problem with non-essentialism is that it's a lie. That's the thing to wake up to. Every time, we can say it this way. There's so little time left in our lives that we could fill it from now to the end of our lives with only the essential things, only the essential relationships and essential life's work. So every time I say yes to a non-essential, I'm saying no to an essential. And that's the trade-off. And that's the, that's the terrible truth of life. If that, in a sense, if that weren't true, we wouldn't have to make any choices. It's like, fine, you don't even need agency. Just say yes to everything without thinking about it all the time. But because you can't do it all, and because trying to do it all doesn't actually produce the quality of life and the quality of relationships that we yearn for, let's give essentialism a try instead of non-essentialism by default.
I'm so grateful for you for sharing these words and these truths, because we've all, well, I can't say all, but many of us have been, conditioned into, the beliefs that you're bringing up here. And it really does, oftentimes require a pause, after a podcast conversation like this, or sadly, when we lose somebody, or I'm so sorry about your friend who's process of, suffering from cancer, that it really does kind of shake us up a little bit. And it brings us back to the core fundamentals and the way of the essentialist, as you call it. And Andy doesn't need to come to that. We can awaken wherever we are and say, okay, we're not going to do it all. We're not going to, help everybody. I remember at some point I wanted to have the impact that Oprah Winfrey had. This is years ago. And then I remember asking one of my daughters when they were young, and I don't know, we talked about Oprah, and one of the girls said, "Who's Oprah?" And I just went,
Yep. Yep.
That's
I've had the
exactly.
exact same experience a few years ago, exact same experience. And it was the same little moment of like, are you kidding me? You can reach 100 million people a week, and not like the person died and then like people have gone on and forgotten. It's while the person's still alive, still having influence, still reaching lots of people in lots of ways, they don't even know who she is. That speaks to this, the the false god of fame. You know, it doesn't pay us for very long, and it doesn't pay us for in the it doesn't pay us in an essential currency.
So, what is the main thought that you want to leave our listeners with in order for them to do less but better and to connect with their most important impact that they want to leave for many, many generations and make that highest possible contribution?
Look, as far as I can tell, life is suffering for almost everybody, almost all of the time. And I remember somebody sharing this idea that hit me, which is that that's true for everybody. So the question isn't, is life going to be a challenge, or is it going to be full of suffering? The question is, will you find something that's meaningful enough and purposeful enough that it justifies the suffering, gives you something to go after instead of falling into it? And it now seems to me that non-essentialism is a reaction to the suffering. It's just a trivial reaction to it. You just numb the pain. Oh, I'll do more stuff. Oh, okay, I'll just get back on social media. Okay, I'll just send more emails. Okay, I'll just try and get more people to follow me. I'll just do more. It's like, it's a reaction that tries to avoid what you're actually experiencing. The alternative, and it just doesn't work at all well. The undisciplined pursuit of more is not a formula for success. It is not a formula for happiness. Much less joy. The path of the essentialist is still full of sacrifice, but it's sacrifice in service of something that matters, and so that you live a life that matters. And so it's a phrase that can feel really trivial, I think, but the phrase is, taking responsibility for your life. But my wife said it to me not very long ago, and it really hit me hard. I felt really disoriented, partially because of Sam's situation, and then just it's other things connected to it. And when she said it, it was like a little seed that just got planted in me. By the next morning, I felt suddenly like myself again, and I knew how to operate in the world again. It's like, no, I'm not going to just be acted upon by the circumstances of life. I'm not going to just go along with it. Going to make choices that feel true to me and right and true. And it's really been something to watch what's happened just even in the last few weeks since that. And the clarity that has started to produce. So I think that's it's like taking responsibility for the prioritization of your life, because, if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will.
Right. And it's very courageous, and it's very self-loving, right? To care about how we feel and to honor what's important to us first and foremost. Of course, in pursuit of having an even bigger contribution. And one of the things that I find, is that once we make that commitment to what that is that even if we fail, even if we don't nearly reach where we wanted to reach, we still know that whatever we did that we considered essential, that we prioritized, was of such importance to us that it was still worth it anyway.
Yes, and I would just add to that, we just got to be really careful about our goals. The Oprah thing hits me because it's, well, I mentioned Effortless before. Let me just tie this in together a little bit, because there's a story that I share in there that I think relates to this. So just in context, essentialism is about figuring out what the right thing is, and Effortless is about doing it in the right way. And they really integrate together. So essentialism has these three parts: explore what's essential, eliminate what's not, and make it as effortless as possible to execute what matters most. Well, I felt that the last of the three was underread or appreciated when I wrote Essentialism. And I thought, I think it needs its own paradigm shift, because you can figure out what's essential and then go at it like an insecure overachiever. You can go after it in a way that's so overthought, over-engineered, overworked that you burn out and you still haven't achieved what actually mattered to you. And so I really wanted to make a case for this different mindset. So the specific story that came to mind as you were saying this in the Oprah example is I was once found myself staring at myself in the mirror, dressed from head to toe in a stormtrooper outfit. I sort of had a slightly out of body moment of like, but how did you get here? What is happening? And I was just in it was just a costume, and it was Halloween, and this was a really expensive costume, and I was considering whether to buy it or not. And here I am, I wasn't 12, I wasn't even 20, a middle-aged man wearing this expensive costume. And in that moment of sort of laughing at myself, I realized that this has been in my mind to buy this since I was 10 years old, and had gone to see Return of the Jedi. And then after the movie, one of my older brothers had said, wouldn't it be so cool to own a stormtrooper costume? So it wasn't even my thought, but because it's an older sibling, I'm the youngest, and I'm so I guess influenceable, that I was like, yes, that would be so cool. And so since that moment, he's like the ones in the movie. So not just like a really authentic costume. And in that moment of looking at myself in the mirror, I was like, there is not one part of me that wants this still. I could get it to that. This is just ridiculous. And so I was talking to Anna about it, my wife Anna, afterwards, and she said, yeah, that's a stormtrooper, man. Like, that's a test, the stormtrooper test. And so that's a short form rule of thumb now for us. Is this a stormtrooper? Are you pursuing this just because you wrote it down once? Just because the idea was picked up somewhere? Just because somebody else did it? I think there's a lot of that in our lives that we don't realize. And the power of goals. I mean, I remember one of my business school professors saying this. He said, goals are the theory that work. And what he was saying is they're so powerful, which they are. They're too powerful, because they can get embedded in your mind, and then it shapes so many decisions afterwards. I mean, we've been talking about the power of essential intent and identifying it and choosing it carefully. Well, if we don't choose them carefully and they're just embedded, the power of what you aim at is so much more powerful than it's obvious. We know if you set a goal and you try to pursue it, that will help you to achieve it, but it's way more powerful than that, because what you aim at stops you seeing everything else. And so if you get the wrong goal, or let's say you get too many goals, or you get somebody else's goal that you just picked up on social media. Oh, that person's been to that country. Oh, now I need to go to that country. That person's taking on this career. That person's doing this education. And now we just are pulling it without even thinking about it. And we've got 25 different things, and we didn't actually consciously choose any of them. Now we'll be pursuing those. We could pursue those for years and years, feel like a failure against a goal that we didn't, wasn't even ours. It's called mimetic thinking. There's a term for this. Interviewed the author of a book where he researched mimetic thinking, and just hear this. Just think about this. What he found is that it's not that we pursue what we want, and it's not that we pursue what other people want. We pursue what we think other people want. Like, that is not a great strategy. And that stormtrooper, way of deciding on things should be a warning to us, to let go of them. What stormtroopers can we let go of, so that we are free to actually pursue what we now feel matters?
Oh, this is music to my ears, in the sense of, right, we operate out of these belief systems, many of which are not even ours. We've just told ourselves that enough times, the story, which may not even be true in the first place. As you said, it's what we think about what we want, what others want. And we get so over attached that we focus on that to the neglect of what really matters often, especially.
Absolutely.
And so as we do that with that, focal vision on that goal, when we're in that over attached place, is that we are blind to possibilities about how to get that thing that we think we want. What that means is we've locked ourselves from our intuitive guidance, because we're so much in our head. We're so stressed out about it that we get incoherent. We're actually not able to think clearly about the very thing that we think we want. So we're not going to achieve it anyway when we're over attached. We're going to be limited because we're not able to access more perceptions, more possibilities. And so it's such a paradox. And so the key is to be attached to things that are important to us at a heart level, and not over attached, right? To the point that we still have some harmony with the other areas of our life. That's the way of the essentialist. And when we do that, we're able to access guidance. So wherever it is that we want, we're able to access it to a path of least resistance, right? Our heart can give us the guidance when we're not in our head all the time, operating out of these false fixed beliefs.
Yeah, I really think so. This idea of effortlessness. If I were writing the book today, I would probably call it, like, the whole book I would call the 85% rule. That's how I would frame it. And the idea of the 85% rule is that we make more progress. Well, the happier we make more progress, we achieve more, not at the 100% level, 100% energy, effort, or certainly it's better than the whatever 110% means, like, oh yes, I'm going to do 110% of it. I don't even know what that means. But certainly illogical. But the 85% rule is that place where it's like, what's your maximum intensity, focus, engagement, and then you withdraw from it. Just not a huge amount, but so that you're in the optimal state, so that you can make better judgment about what to do. You've got enough buffer and energy to deal with whatever's coming tomorrow. And so I think it's a really powerful paradigm, especially for insecure overachievers. Let me share one story about this that I think, it certainly took my breath away when I was researching it. You have to go back to the 1850s, when, like, the moon race of the time was who will get to the South Pole first. And so it had captured the public's imagination in a similar way as, okay, well, is it the Russians, the Americans that are going to get to the moon first? Well, at the time, it was, various different teams were trying and failing. Shackleton, who's famous example of a team that tried and they failed, but they all got back alive. And there's a whole story about that, and it's made into a movie. That's happening right before this race to the poles takes place. And the race to the poles is two teams that set off on almost on the same day, basically, but from two different locations. One is a Norwegian team and the other is a British team. And they have two different expedition leaders and a very different approach. The British expedition leader had what I would describe as a maximum effort equals maximum results mindset. And that feels really persuasive to me. It's like very logical, actually. Logical, and the achiever in me just goes, yeah, that has to be true. It was interpreted like this. Day one, we just could have put in maximum effort to go the maximum distance, on the basis that if you just do that, then you're going to win. And of course, that must be right. So day one, you go 50 miles. If you can, 30, 40, 50, you go as far as you can go. Day two, you do the same. Day three, you do the same. But then what happened for them was that suddenly they had a day that was really bad weather. And so they get out and they try to make the journey still, but they just can't do it. They're burned out enough. They're exhausted enough from this, this approach, that they just have to set up camp again, and they just have to stay hunkered down, and they are demoralized and exhausted as they've got nothing to do. There's writing in the journals. That's how we know all about what happened. And they're saying, we have the worst weather of anybody who's ever tried to do this. It was such terrible luck. And lots of entries like that. Actually, they were wrong about that, which I find interesting, because they had modeled their own attempt based on another team that had tried before them. And the British team had better weather throughout their attempt than the team that they had been modeling off. But they felt it was worse. They thought it was worse. And that's something about this approach. What they had done without meaning to is created a boom and bust approach to execution. So they're going faster, further for a few days, and then there's nothing. They can't do anything. And so then that's draining to them, and it's draining psychologically. And they do this the whole time. Now, one of their entries wrote, we don't think anybody could make progress in weather like this. But one team could, and that was the Norwegian team, whose expedition leader had a different mindset. And the mindset I would describe as optimal effort equals maximum results. And he'd learned from spending time with the indigenous people in Antarctica that if you want to survive and thrive in the extremity of the environment, you have to manage your sweat, which is a really interesting insight. Like it's not something that would be intuitive for any of us that haven't lived in that environment, but it literally, if you try to go too far too fast, the body sweat will freeze. You'll be exhausted. It will traumatize your body and so on. So they interpreted what they'd learned as this: 15 miles, 15 miles per day. Day one, we'll go 15. We could go 20, 30, 40, 50, fine, but we're still not going to do 15. And they did that day one, day two, day three. First day, they have terrible weather. They do it again, 15. They have enough left in the tank. And so they're not just exhausted and burned out, and they're not just depressed at my goodness, we're not making progress now, and we're bored out of our minds. And they just made progress. So they had the satisfaction of meaningful progress day in and day out, whatever the weather is outside of them. And that affected the psychological weather within them. So then the plot thickens when they get within 15 miles of the 45 miles of the South Pole. They have perfect weather. They have perfect sledding conditions. And to add to the challenging decision that they faced, they don't know where the British team is. For all they know, the British team are ahead of them. So what do? Do you violate the rule just once? You say, okay, for this time, if they violate the rule, they can make that in one day. They could just push themselves and do it. And I don't know about you, but I think I would have pushed. But they didn't. They paced. Even under those circumstances, they still paced themselves. They averaged 15 miles a day. It took them 3 more days and they got to the South Pole. All right, well, they beat the British team by more than 20 days. It's not what should happen, right? Like, it's not what should happen. Insecure overachievers do not believe the principle, the truth that story illustrates. In fact, it almost knocked me off my chair as I was reading the biography, the original, including original journals of these teams. The biographer chose the following phrase. He said, the Norwegian team continued to make progress, 3 words, without particular effort. It's unthinkable. It's an unthinkable thing to write. It's the reason people's imaginations are captured with it is because nobody in the history of the whole world had got to the South Pole. And the reason nobody had ever done that is because it's the most physically arduous, challenging thing anyone could think of. And so the idea that the biographer would summarize the Norwegian journey in that way without particular effort. Now, I'm not suggesting, and I don't think he was suggesting, that there actually was no effort. Obviously, there was effort, and obviously there was sacrifice. But there was something about that upper bound and lower bound approach, that consistency, that steadiness, that was not characterized by extreme effort, that wasn't its primary characteristic, and that consistency and a sort of, what would you say, like sustained performance was really what it is that's at stake. Well, to me, that story captures why the 85% rule is so relevant, so powerful. There's one more piece to the story, which is non-trivial. The Norwegian team got there and they also had to make the 15,000-mile journey back to Norway. Like, that's not nothing. Getting to the South Pole and not getting back to Norway changes the whole story. They did make it all the way back, but the British team didn't. They made it to the South Pole, but they all died on what would have been the journey home. Not one of those team members made it back alive. That's another part of the story worth considering. What we need, what achievers need, is a healthy productivity. And the way to get it is to break out of the 10x paradox, which is you and I and many of the people listening want to achieve 10x results. That is, in quality and in quantity, 10x results. Maybe everybody does. But nobody listening to this, nobody watching this can work 10 times harder. And if you put those two together, that's the 10x paradox. And that's really what Effortless and Essentialism 2 combine together to try to address. If you can't work 10 times harder, you have to find a better, smarter, different way of thinking about the problem and a different way of going about executing it.
I guess how to make the essential things in our life, become effortless, as you
yes.
say. And I so thank you for that story. That is such a strong story.
Mm.
And, it also reminds us that, again, our state matters as we're pursuing what we're pursuing, our ability to stay resilient, as you said, to make it all the way, quote unquote, back home. And that when we are in a let's call it incoherent state, we're not able to see things clearly. Things seem worse than they are. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not able to access our guidance as to what to do. So there is something really important about, right, in this example, right, that steady, right, approach and staying very congruent, right, honoring that approach, even when, it seems very, possible to win and all that stuff, but really to stay in a balanced place, which I see it as head and heart together. So our head is telling us something, and we honor heart, right? That place. It's almost like the infinity sign, right? We kind of go back and forth. We're not over attached to winning or over attached to, right? We're just having a process, trusting the process, and managing our energy.
Yeah, I think that's all well said. It's, one thing that makes me think of is just, from a mindset point of view, it's deconstructing the idea that easy equals lazy. And instead to say, well, I mean, first of all, to say that easy doesn't equal lazy, because it literally doesn't. Easy means you're not willing to put in effort, and lazy is not willing to put in effort, and easy is that something doesn't take effort. And if we want to achieve more of the things that matter most, we have to construct systems that make it easier, so that we have enough space to deal with the next level of contribution. It makes me, in interest of time, I won't share another story, but there's so many examples of this. If you want to make your highest contribution, you can't keep doing things the way you've always been doing them.
That's right. That's right. You got to unlearn and relearn. I agree with that.
Yes,
like the Einstein,
very much so.
right? You can't create a new solution from that same level of awareness or consciousness that created the problem.
Yeah.
So many of us have been conditioned into this, the more that you do, the more that you have, and then the better you feel. And it's actually the opposite. It's the better you feel by that essentialist way, essentialist, effortless way, right? The better you feel, that really the more that you'll have, and the less that you do, that you'll need to do, and just the better, more fulfilled that you'll be. And
Yes.
end of life, looking back and saying, I did this my way, I did it the right way, and I feel good.
Mm-hmm.
So how can people learn even more about your amazing books, your podcast, how can they sign up for your newsletter? I really encourage our listeners to dive real deep. There's so many wonderful resources. Where can we learn more?
I think if people just want to sort of, what's the first step? We just spent, well, we thought it was going to take us a few months, but it took us almost a year to design it's completely free, less but better program. It's a 21-day thing. You get a workbook, you get emails, not every day, just because it's overwhelming, but every 3 or 4 days for that period. And you just work through it. Includes videos, it includes links to things. And so you have all these assets to help you. Where do you start applying Essentialism and Effortless? Where would you start that? And so you just go gregmckeown.com, gregmckeown.com. And it takes 10 seconds. You can sign up right on the homepage. And that, to me, is that's the place to begin.
Thank you. What a precious gift. And I'm so thankful to you for the good work that you do, for all of the help that you've given to me over these years to have a better perspective of what's most important. And I have adjusted things that I've done, said no to things that are not essential, thanks to you. And so I'm very grateful and really excited for our listeners and viewers to explore what you give to the world. It'll help them. I know that for sure.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you today.
Hi, Game Changers. I hope you loved this episode with Greg McKeown. He is the real deal and just so down to earth. And I hope you got some great insights to kind of bring you back home to what's most essential for you in your life. I know I certainly got a lot out of that conversation. I'm still getting stuff from that conversation. I've had a chance to hear it a few times now, and I'm really grateful you were here. If you want to learn even more about how to prioritize what really matters, what's most essential in your life, I invite you to check out episode 157 with Bob Mulhorn. He is an amazing, beautiful soul as well, and so many nuggets, a very successful man, and yet so down to earth, kind of like Greg. I hope you'll really enjoy it and get some good nuggets for yourself. So all my love to you, to your loved ones, and thank you. Thank you for being here. Bye for now.